I've often seen on social media posts being shared around about the Orans Posture, that laity should not perform the Orans Posture, which are arms outstretched, during the Mass, during the Our Father, for example. And this has gone round. I mean, it must be 10 years that I've seen it going around Catholic media saying, this posture is not for the laity. And I kind of want to put this topic to bed because, at least on my channel, because there's been so much debate about it, about rubrics and so forth, that it's important that we know, should or shouldn't we, or can or can't we use this posture at Mass. And the first thing we need to remember, this is a very traditional posture of praying that goes back to apostolic times for the whole congregation. I speak from a position of study, having studied it here. If you ever go to Rome, you will see in early church art that Orans posture being used so many times. And it's not just clergy that used it. If you think about it, Our Lady, when she appears at Knock, she appears in the Orans posture. So it's very clear there, the posture that she's using. And in the early church, during the Eucharist, everybody would have used that posture at certain times during the liturgy, especially at the Our Father. And we still see that ancient tradition carried on in the East. If you go to a Syriac divine liturgy, everybody is using the Orans posture at certain points. Now, I hear is that some people, Catholics, claiming that in the Roman Rite it's forbidden, that it's not part of the rubrics. Rubrics apply to clergy, not to laity. If you wanted to be really traditional at a Roman Catholic Mass, you would take out the pews and start standing, because up until the Reformation, up until 500 years ago, most churches didn't have pews and seats. They might have had some stalls or for some people, but mostly churches in the inside were empty. It's just an education to people to understand the history of your faith. So is it permissible for a Catholic who goes to Mass to pray with their arms like this? I always think that your bodily postures help us to pray. If you're there with your hands folded and just sitting down and you're just not, pray with your hands in a prayer like this, pray with them in the Orans posture. It's good that our body reflects the praying that we do. And I always admire, although I don't do it myself, because when we grew up in Ireland in the 1970s, at Mass Osiris, at the time we didn't pray like this. But I've often seen it in different rites, and I have gone to different rites, how people pray with the Orans posture. I always admired that. You see it with the Syro-Malabar or Maronite liturgies or the Syriac liturgies that I've been to. And so it is a very ancient tradition. And as far as I was told when I studied up on the subject, in the Latin tradition, the Latin rite, up until the 9th century, the laity at certain points would have prayed in that Orans position. So it goes back to apostolic times in the early church. We know, for example, if you go to sacred scripture, St. Paul says in 1 Timothy, I desire then that in every place that men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger and quarreling. This is, you can study it up, you can see it in sacred art and in mosaics in Rome, in the catacombs, or in various places. And so I don't see why we are so caught up in later part of church development that we would not encourage something which Our Lady does in Knock. She prays with the Orans posture. If it helps you, pray with it. And sometimes I think at Mass we should just. I don't see what problem it is that somebody wants to pray with that. I have no qualms or problems. A big problem I do have is, and I've seen this at some masses, and when it comes to the Our Father and people start using the Orans posture, that people hold hands together. That is not part of church tradition. I don't know where that popped out of, but that's at just one kind of crazy mass that I went to in the States once. It was in Atlanta, and I just thought it was bizarre. But the Orans posture that you can use while praying is fully traditional. And, our posture can help us, kneeling or standing. These postures in prayer can help us, and I find it interesting. There's just one note, and I forget the chapter that Maria Valtorta speaks about. Maria Valtorta sees the early church. This is Christ and his apostles and the disciples and followers. When they were praying, they were all praying with the Orans posture. She sees them in a room praying with the Orans posture. And I just think it's interesting that, this posture is ancient church tradition going back to apostolic times. Why wouldn't we use this posture if you want to use it? And I do think the Our Father specifically would have been prayed with the Orans posture by everyone. When Christ prayed, he prayed with the Orans posture. His disciples prayed with the Orans posture. The women disciples, everybody would have prayed with that posture. It wasn't like this. And today that tradition carries on during the liturgy when we have priests praying with us. But we're also, fully entitled to use it because the early church, everybody would have used it. And again, in other liturgies, that tradition carries on. So that's just my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments. But again, rubrics apply to clerics, not to the laity. But I do think it's important that there's nothing wrong with involving yourself in prayer with that position of prayer. Anyway, God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.